大家好，今日嚟講下咧，美國副總統范斯怒屌西方世界嘅左膠。嗱，咁2月14號咧，德國慕尼黑咧就係一個國際安全嘅會議啦。咁但開會之前咧就有條中東嘅難民啦一個阿富汗嘅所謂尋求庇護者咧，就揸住架車咧撞向慕尼黑嗰啲人群嗰度。咁暫時咧錄得36傷嘅。咁兼且2月23號咧就會舉行德國嘅總統大選造勢活動。咁呢個恐襲咧，即係俾晒范斯入位啊！嗱，咁之前都同大家講過噶啦，我都唔係侵粉嚟嘅。嗱，我唔係侵粉，但係亦都唔係反侵啦，係中間少少啦。咁如果你俾我定位咧，就侵咧就係一個行動者啦。咁但係佢嘅行動要點樣解説或者點樣解讀或者係點樣解釋佢嘅行動有啲咩背後嘅原因或者有啲咩目的咧？咁呢個樣嘢咧就要交俾范斯啦。咁好簡單啦，副總統其實冇乜實權嘅啫嘛。咁但係咧，范斯把口咧真係幾勁嘅嚇。咁喺個慕尼黑嘅國際安全會議嗰度咧，范斯一輪嘴咧就炮轟晒所有即係西方世界即係歐美嘅左膠或者西方媒體嗰啲惡毒嘅左膠做法啦。嗱，首先佢講咗咧，其實最大嘅危險咧就並非話係中國並非話係俄羅斯而係咧話你哋西方世界咧內部有一啲問題你哋咧係最危險嘅就係咧左膠當然佢冇用左膠呢兩個字咁但係咧佢講嗰所有問題咧，其實就係呢10零年咧極左思潮嘅世界入邊咧衍生出嚟嘅好多問題，其實同二戰大戰之前咧綏靖政策差唔多嘅啫。嗱，首先講俄烏問題啦，咁范斯都講喂，其實你哋歐洲咧係應該要肩負起一啲軍事上嘅責任嘅，唔好成日靠晒美國佬啦。嗱，因為美國咧都係北約嘅分子之一啦。嗱，咁由特朗普1.0講到2.0咁滯噶啦，就係歐洲嗰啲國家咧嘅付出喂唔成正比，全部咧佔個 GDP 咧喂2% 都唔夠。喂，大佬不如咧升翻少少啦，去到5% 啦，唔好下下咧要美國佬埋單先得噶嘛。大家都係北約嘅一份子，係一個共同嘅合作框架嚟噶嘛，唔係話下下都要美國做大佬咁樣樣噶嘛。同埋佢都有講啦，歐洲咧就應該係歐洲自己咧處理翻自己嘅問題，然之後美國佬咧就處理翻更加大嘅問題啦。咁潛台詞當然係講緊中國啦。咁你哋班歐洲左膠搞到歐洲咧，喂七國咁亂10幾年咧，哇啲移民問題啦，嗰啲左膠左獨思潮荼毒晒成個歐洲，然之後咧不停咁屌到台下邊嗰班人咧應一應即係你見拍手掌咧，其實得嗰幾個人嘅，大部分人都唔拍手掌嘅，好好笑。跟住又講埋，喂，究竟慕尼黑呢單恐襲案究竟咩事咪就係你哋無限咁放嗰啲死人難民過嚟咯。嗱，其實我喺英國嗰度咧，見到嗰啲學校咧，其實好多嗰啲中東人讀書嘅。咁但係咧有個問題嚟啦，喂，嗰啲簽證咧，其實咧你話自己幾多歲就幾多歲噶啦。我就咁睇嗰啲樣喂，大佬冇40都有30歲啦，但係咧個個都話自己咧係 minor， 咩 minor 咧就係咧未成年咁未成年嘅簽證讀書簽證咧就好易批嘅。喂，大佬，其實咧我哋都分到中東佬咧大概個年齡嘛。你話分嗰啲鬼妹有幾大夠唔夠稱就難啫。咁但係咧睇嗰啲中東佬嗰啲樣咧，喂，唔好玩滿面皺紋，話鬍鬚生到即係黐線，真係30幾40歲。咁但係咧佢全部咧都同大家講咧講18歲。咁YouTube 咧有啲片咧好鬼戇鳩嘅，專登咧訪問嗰啲學校行出嚟嗰啲中東佬咧，訪問下幾多歲啦，你咪做緊嘢咁樣啦。咁但係咧，喂，我唔係我唔係做緊嘢噶，我係18歲17歲16歲咁樣讀緊書。即係咁，當然啦，嗰啲 YouTuber 當然係知道嗰啲中東佬咧講大話啦。咁但係咧都唔可以即場拆穿噶嘛，因為任佢講嘅冇文件噶嘛。咁嗰啲人咧嚟到英國歐洲讀書咧，跟住咧可以一帶五帶十10帶100咁樣帶晒啲親戚朋友過嚟咧，攞晒啲簽證，咁入住嗰啲歐洲地方噶啦。咁同埋咧，范斯都有講過英國嘅問題即係好明顯咧，嗰啲中東佬咧喺法國嗰度坐船去英國咧，其實唔係真係難民嚟噶。如果係難民嘅話咧，一去到歐洲咁咪 OK 咯。喂，個個國家都會收你哋難民噶嘛，咁點解一定要去英國啫？因為英國所謂經濟條件好啲嘛，同埋咧真係多啲就業機會。咁你話唔係英國咁差都咁多人去嘅咩？其實對比起歐洲咧，英國係真係好啲㗎啦，已經係。你諗下，如果難民的話，純粹係保命的話咧，你去咗法國嗰度咪搞掂咯？你去唔到法國咁咪德國咯，其他地方都一樣收㗎啫嘛。咁點解一定要去坐架船 駁艇駁到去英國嗰度咧，咁多地方唔去，一定要最終目的去英國，咁好明顯經濟移民，而唔係即係危險啊，而唔係即係難民啦，因為英國無限量咁樣收啊嘛。即係你睇工黨就知啦，喂，移民啊就可以收，咁但係非法移民咧都照樣收喎。你真係問非法移民嗰啲人啊，犯咗啲咩法啊？喂，工黨即係同你講話冇犯法㗎嚇，咁非法移民咁點解係冇犯法啊？非法移民點解可以攞到簽證嘅咧？到最後啊，真係神奇。咁凡事咧就係屌呢啲問題啦嚇。喂，你哋歐洲啊，點解又有慕尼黑嘅恐襲啊？咁啊又係因為你哋啊無限量收難民啊！依家咧1/5嘅人口咧就已經變咗係中東佬啦，咁完全係人口清洗嚟嘅。咁佢當然就冇好極右咁樣話嗰啲難民點啦，咁但係咧真係要審批噶嘛。跟住咧佢打埋個環保少女出嚟，你哋班歐洲佬咧就俾環保少女玩咗咁多年啦，咁你點解係唔可以容忍Elon Musk 講幾句嘢咧？即係咧佢好搞笑嘅講得。嗱咁佢今次嘅選舉咗之後嘅演講咧，其實咧精彩過佢選舉之前嘅。因為已經冇乜包袱啊嘛，照屌咪屌咯，係咪先？唔怕你啊嘛。咁同埋咧，佢今次講嗰啲政策咧，或者係一啲問題咧，擺明就係即係 Donald Trump 係負責做，佢負責講嘅。嗱咁 Donald Trump 依家咧就好似逼緊烏克蘭投降咁樣啦，啲人話佢話出賣烏克蘭啊，又想攞佢啲礦產啦。嗱咁其實不嬲咧，Donald Trump 咧都係獅子開大口開天殺價落地還錢嘅。喺俄烏問題上邊咧，佢就一個重點咧就係美國優先，咁美國優先之下咧，其實俄烏繼續打仗咧冇乜問題，咁不過咧一定要係美國得益先嘅，或者唔可以損害美國嘅利益啦。咁所以咧即係佢叫烏克蘭喂快啲投降啦，或者係要50% 嘅礦產咧，其實咧我覺得係獅子開大口，同埋咧係買緊大細，即係咧買咩大細咧就賭錢咁樣大又買細又買，我圍息我都買埋，即係咧無論你點樣開都好啦，都一定係美國贏嘅，或者美國唔會輸先啦。嗱咁最終目的咧，其實即係未必係嗰50% 礦產嘅，咁因為咧烏克蘭嘅礦產咧，其實咧嗰啲稀土咧就唔係話真係特別靚嘅啫，咁當然好過冇啦。咁但係咧，咁其實全世界最靚嘅稀土咧，頭嗰幾位咧就一定係有格陵蘭粉嘅。咁烏克蘭咧唔係話冇都有嘅。都係豐富嘅，不過咧對比起其他國家嚟講咧，就唔係話特別標青啦。咁係咪真係想佢要佢50% 嘅礦產，然之後同佢打仗咧打翻啲地翻嚟咧？咁呢個真係後話嚟嘅。最主要咧，佢就係買緊3樣嘢3樣嘢開邊飯咧，美國都係唔會輸嘅。最好咧就係俄烏戰爭即刻結束啦，即係唔理你哋究竟到最後係點樣分啲地點樣投降邊個投降都好啦。咁美國咧就即刻打完唔需要再軍援啦，咁可以咧主要地針對翻亞太戰略啦，即係咧將個矛頭咧指翻做台海嗰邊先。咁呢個咧就係美國上策啦。咁中策咧就係美國唔需要再軍援或者唔軍援好多啦。咁歐洲佬咧就自己搞掂翻嘅。因為咧美國講到明啦，烏克蘭咧加入北約咧係不切實際啊嘛。咁但係英國德國法國嗰啲或者北歐國家咧就好歡迎烏克蘭加入北約噶嘛。咁要加入北約咧，首先咧就係要北約所有成員國咧都冇異議先。咁但係咧，如果係美國 say no 的話咧，咁就唔俾佢加入啦。咁但係依家美國咧就話自己咧想退出北約哦。咁美國退出咗北約的話咧，其實就冇話事權噶啦嘛。咁即係班歐洲佬咧就自己決定究竟俾唔俾烏克蘭入嚟。咁其實咧 Donald Trump 咧即係唔喺北約入邊咧都冇乜太大所謂嘅。咁因為咧其實佢最主要咧就係想咧嗰班歐洲北約咧或者歐洲佬咧就自己將個軍費加翻去到 GDP 5% 先啦，即係唔好太低啊！你依家好多國家連2% 都冇，咁玩咩啫？係咪先？依家又放風出嚟，又話俄羅斯5年之內咧就會打北約啦。咁你哋自己班歐洲佬咧就諗定佢先即係咧依家開始要諗噶啦，你哋唔好成日靠晒美國咁樣啦。咁所以咧中間嘅策略咧就係咧繼續打唔緊要，不過咧美國唔係好出噶啦，或者唔出啦完全最主要咧係歐洲佬自己出翻。咁其實如果歐洲真係落兵出兵去烏克蘭的話咧，即係依家咧英國德國都講緊啦即係研討緊呢個方案。其實咧就應該係打得贏嘅絕對，因為現代戰爭唔係打人嘅啦嘛，唔係打人海戰術噶嘛，即係打成個體系噶嘛。其實人唔使好多嘅，因為咧只要北約咧可以幫到烏克蘭嘅制空權咧，基本上就贏緊噶啦。現代戰爭點樣打咧？你睇下美國佬點樣打中東就得噶啦。空優跟住咧洗地，洗完地之後咧先慢慢派啲人落去打。咁啲人唔夠打或者有危險嘅唔緊要，call 空中支援咁樣 就唔係開炮啊，去開空中支援咁樣射過去啊嘛，最安全啦嘛。咁最主要咧就係咧防空兼且防空之下咧係攞到個制空權，即係攞到對面塊土地個制空權啊，咁啊點射佢都得啦。咁對方都射過嚟咧又射唔到喎，佢想派飛機過嚟咧又派唔到。咁所以咧德國啊或者係波蘭啊英國咧，如果真係派兵的話咧，其實基本上就好快玩完嘅啫，即係好快玩完俄羅斯啊。咁呢個係中策啦。咁下一策咧就係美國佬繼續要軍援，不過咧就起碼可以攞到咧烏克蘭烏東嗰啲礦產咧50%嘅。嗱，咁站於烏克蘭嚟講咧，呢個下策咧就喪權辱國啦，即係咧俾咗50%你。咁但係咧你計翻條數咧，其實起碼咧可以攞得翻烏東嗰塊地啊。即係嗱，你話克里米亞攞唔攞得翻咧，就咁啊真係後話嘅。咁但係咧最起碼咧可以回復翻戰前嘅水平先啦，嗰啲地方啊。同埋咧你要諗啊，你美國佬要攞到烏東嗰啲礦產咧。咁啊，即係要打翻烏東翻嚟啦。咁即係烏東咧就應該攞得翻嘅。對於烏克蘭嚟講咧，係差；對於美國嚟講咧，都係差嘅，因為咧佢都係要繼續付出啊嘛。咁但係咧，起碼落地咧都攞翻扎沙，起碼有嗰啲礦產。所以咧，你問我喂，究竟Donald Trump 係咪真係出賣烏克蘭咧？其實唔係嘅。你睇翻佢個部署咧，就好似嗰啲藍絲狀噶啦，捉緊一盤大棋啊！係佢幾方面做緊嘢，即係一方面咧就打去習近平嗰度啦，一方面咧打去普京嗰度啦，一方面咧就要50%你簽唔簽？唔簽唔緊要。依家唔係揸住支槍要你簽，咁但係咧另一方面咧就同緊歐洲佬講啦，喂歐洲佬唔該你加軍費。咁其實你諗緊一樣嘢啦，喂如果美國佬自己軍援烏克蘭就搞掂，係攞咗50%嘅礦產的話，我使嗰啲歐洲佬加軍費咩？因為美國已經包底搞掂噶啦嘛，咁我唔使歐洲佬出面啦，係咪先？咁其實咧你計翻啦。其實嗰個島主咧就係不停咁買晒所有機會跑出嘅可能性，即係咧開大又買，開細又買，位息3個6佢都買埋，佢係幾方便落注嘅。如果佢真係咁着緊嗰50%礦產的話咧，其實咧俄烏戰爭唔停咧就最好嘅，因為美國可以真係攞到啲礦產啊嘛，咁所以咧冇理由要普京和談啊。咁如果佢又要普京和談，又要想繼續打落去攞嗰50%礦產，又要北約加軍費加到5%，其實你諗咧好 contradict 嘅，好唔合理嘅，因為咧冇可能3件事或者係4件事啦，連埋習近平可以並存得到嘅。咁咧其實咧佢係買緊所有策略，幾樣嘢咧佢都希望中一樣咧，起碼美國佬唔會蝕先。嗱，賺唔賺咧就後話，咁但係咧起碼喺呢條數上面咧就唔會咧無限量咁樣蝕落去先。同埋如果美國佬繼續咁樣俾錢啦，歐洲佬唔肯加軍費，唔肯咧再諗，喂將來究竟打唔打得過，或者將來真係冇美國佬而北約自己歐洲要面對俄羅斯都話打唔打得過，呢個真係重點啊嘛。咁然之後再睇下范斯今次咧怒屌歐洲左膠，咁你又發覺咧其實咧我所講嘅嘢咧不無道理嗱。當然啦，我係自己分析嘅啫，即係自己諗自己講。不過咧，我覺得我嘅分析咧都係幾貼實嘅。當然啦，好多反侵力咧就即係好着重 Donald Trump 講嘅每一句說話，然之後係挑即係唔係挑骨頭咁簡單啊，係挑骨髓。咁但係大家要明白啦，即係 Donald Trump 每一日講嗰啲咧都唔同噶嘛。佢講嗰啲咩要做啲乜嘢要講啲乜嘢咧，其實唔係重點啊。最重要咧就係講俾你聽，然之後你聽完之後有咩反應。佢最想咧就係睇你有咩反應，然之後有咩議價能力，有咩可以擺喺台面度同你做 bargaining。佢每次講嘢咧就係浪高嚟賣，開天殺價，然之後落地還錢。睇下美國咧可以喺俄烏戰爭上邊咧扮演乜嘢角色？佢唔可以冇角色嘅，因為冇角色的話咧就等同咧美國佬嗰個影響力冇咗即係咧世界秩序冇咗你唔緊要，佢就係唔想咁。不過咧，無論你打唔打和唔和談，割唔割地，投唔投降都好，或者係有冇礦產俾美國佬都好啦，佢就係想美國佬站於不敗之地。咁當然美國佬站於不敗之地，可能咧就對於烏克蘭嚟講就唔係一件最完美嘅事啦咁但係咧上中下3個可能性咧，其實烏克蘭都唔係話即係太過衰嘅啫。因為其實冇乜可能咧，就係要烏克蘭割烏東俾俄羅斯割克里米亞俾俄羅斯，然之後投降認輸而家停戰，然之後劃地為界。因為呢個 option 的話咧，首先烏克蘭就唔會接受啦，第二歐洲佬咧係唔會接受嘅，最少德國、法國、英國係唔會接受啦，或者係其他北歐國家都唔會接受嘅。就算佢哋接受咧，波蘭都唔會接受嘅。波蘭咧係北約入邊咧被譽為最強陸軍啦，基本上係準備開打咁滯啦，因為接壤得俄羅斯係最多噶嘛。咁所以咧，我就真係唔係好擔心要烏克蘭即刻割地求和賠款或者認輸 變成一個俄羅斯嘅一個州份咁，我覺得就暫時睇唔到呢個可能性啦。好，唔講咁多啦，俾大家睇下咧范斯講嗰啲嘢啦，我都覺得幾好睇嘅，即係起碼咧噴到下邊嗰班人咧一面屁先啊嘛。都係嗰句啦 ，AI 翻譯啊，不過今次 AI 翻譯咧都係好過之前噶啦，因為而家 AI 咧都起碼聰明咗啲啊嘛。放心啊，我係用鬼佬嘅 AI 翻譯嘅，都幾好幾準嘅嚇 ，Microsoft 嗰啲 AI。好，去片。
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the gathered delegates and luminaries and media professionals, and thanks especially to the host of the Munich Security Conference for being able to put on such an incredible event. We're of course thrilled to be here. We're happy to be here, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And it's great to be back in Germany. As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of us who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples, to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we will certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but we gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with. Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when people represent, when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or, even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we're defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course it's gotten much higher since. And we know this situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk. But what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless you.